The courtroom was quiet, except for the faint rustle of paper and the echo of one trembling voice. "Laura Daniels," the clerk called out. A woman in her 30s stepped forward, clutching a folded stack of parking tickets so tightly her knuckles turned white. Her eyes were tired, the kind of tired that doesn't come from sleepless nights alone, but from months of holding back tears. Judge Frank Caprio looked up from his bench, his expression calm but curious. "Good morning, Miss Daniels," he said kindly. "You've got a few tickets here. Looks like 3, maybe 4. Let's take a look together." But before the papers even left his hand, something about her silence stopped him. Her lips trembled. "I wasn't ignoring the law, Your Honor," she whispered. "I just couldn't leave him alone." The courtroom stilled. No one knew who him was, not yet. And in that pause, the weight of a mother's heart began to unfold. Friends, before we continue, only 4% of viewers watching stories like this are subscribed. If you believe compassion still matters in our world, take a second and hit that subscribe button, because what happens next will remind you that kindness can change lives. When Judge Caprio hears the truth behind those tickets, the entire courtroom breaks down in tears. It was a quiet morning in Providence, Rhode Island. Sunlight filtered softly through the courthouse blinds, casting golden lines across the polished wooden benches. Outside, the world buzzed on. Parking meters clicked. Traffic lights blinked. But inside Judge Caprio's courtroom, time moved differently. Here, the law met humanity. Every morning, people lined up with their envelopes and fines. Teachers, construction workers, young parents, retirees. Some smiled nervously, others clutched their papers like confessions. For many, this was more than just a ticket. It was a glimpse into their private struggles, a moment where someone might finally understand. At the center of it all sat Judge Frank Caprio, the man whose warmth and humor had turned this small courtroom into a global symbol of compassion. His familiar tone greeted each case like an old friend. "Good morning, how are we today?" he'd say, his voice a blend of authority and kindness. That morning's docket seemed ordinary enough. Parking violations, minor fines, overdue notices, nothing unusual. Yet, among those files lay one thin folder that would soon ripple far beyond those 4 walls. "Next case," the clerk announced. "Ms. Laura Daniels." Heads turned. A woman rose from the back bench. Her movements were slow, cautious, almost apologetic. She wore a faded gray sweater, the kind you hold on to because it still smells faintly of home. Her hair was tied back loosely, and beneath her calm surface, there was an unmistakable weariness, the kind of exhaustion that carries a story too heavy to tell. Judge Caprio smiled gently, unaware that behind her quiet presence lay a truth that would stop the courtroom. And soon, the entire internet, in its tracks. Laura Daniels was 36 years old. Though grief had added invisible years to her face, she stood at the defendant's podium with her shoulders slightly hunched, her eyes fixed on the floor as if looking at her own reflection there. "Good morning, Ms. Daniels," the judge said, adjusting his glasses. "You've got 3 unpaid parking tickets totaling $180. Is that right?" She nodded. "Yes, Your Honor, I know I should have paid them. I just fell behind." Her voice was gentle, apologetic. Every word came out as if weighed down by guilt. The clerk read aloud the offenses: expired meter, overnight parking, and 1 for street cleaning. Simple common tickets. Nothing dramatic. But as the list went on, Judge Caprio noticed something different. She wasn't defensive. She wasn't angry. She looked defeated. He leaned forward slightly. "Ms. Daniels, are you okay? You seem a little overwhelmed." She smiled faintly, though it barely reached her eyes. "I'm fine, sir. Just tired. It's been a rough few months." The judge nodded, giving her space. "Would you like to tell me what happened?" Laura hesitated. Her hands fidgeted in her lap. She took a deep breath and looked down at the small hospital bracelet wrapped loosely around her wrist, a worn white band with fading ink. The name printed on it was still visible, Ethan Daniels. The courtroom fell into stillness. She brushed her thumb across the band, as though it were something sacred. "My son," she whispered, and with those 2 words, the story began to shift. That one name, Ethan, changed the entire tone of the room. The prosecutor, usually brisk and businesslike, glanced toward her with quiet curiosity. Even the court clerk leaned in, her pen frozen in mid-air. Judge Caprio, known for his compassion, sensed it that unspoken ache behind Laura's composure. He didn't press yet. Instead, he gave her what so few people do when life crumbles: time. "Take your time, Ms. Daniels," he said gently. "We're not in a hurry." Her eyes glistened. "Thank you, Judge. It's just—" Hard to explain, and for a moment silence filled the room again, the kind of silence that feels heavier than any sound. Laura finally began to speak. "I used to work at St. Mary's Hospital," she said softly. "I was a receptionist. It wasn't much, but it kept us afloat." Judge Caprio nodded, listening intently. "And you lost that job?" "Yes, sir," she said. "About 6 months ago, my son—" "He got sick," the judge's brow furrowed. "Sick? How old is he?" "He just turned 8. Her voice broke slightly. "His name is Ethan." A hush fell over the courtroom. Laura continued, her words trembling. "He was diagnosed with a rare cancer, one that spreads fast. I tried to keep working, I really did, but he needed me there. Every day, every night." Judge Caprio's tone softened. "You stopped working to take care of him." "Yes, sir." She nodded. "The hospital was kind at first, but after a while they couldn't hold my position. I was missing too many shifts. Eventually they let me go." The prosecutor began to speak, mentioning the accumulated fines and the city's late fee policy, but Judge Caprio lifted his hand slightly, a small gesture that said everything. "Not now." He turned back to Laura. "And these tickets, when were they issued?" "Mostly in the past few months," she said. "I parked outside the hospital a few times when Ethan was admitted. Sometimes overnight. Sometimes I forgot the street cleaning schedule. I'd come out after spending the night beside his bed and—" There they were, another envelope. The judge nodded quietly, his gaze dropping to the papers before him. "I know it's no excuse," she said, tears pooling in her eyes, "but I just couldn't think about anything else. The bills, the fines, they all piled up. I thought I'd find a way to pay later." The prosecutor spoke again, gently this time. "Your Honor, standard policy says—" But Caprio interrupted softly. "Yes, I know the policy, but policies don't know the full story, do they?" The courtroom held its breath. Laura's shoulders began to shake. "I wasn't trying to break the law," she said. "I just didn't have the strength anymore. Some nights I'd fall asleep in my car outside the hospital because I didn't want to miss his next treatment." The judge looked at her for a long moment, his expression unreadable but kind. He took off his glasses, set them on the desk, and folded his hands. "Ms. Daniels," he said quietly, "you don't need to apologize for loving your child." The words hit her like sunlight breaking through a storm. Friends, if you've ever had to choose between following the rules and following your heart, hit that like button, because what this mother says next will stay with you forever. Laura reached into her worn purse and pulled out a small photograph. The edges were frayed, the surface soft from years of fingers tracing the same smiling face. She held it delicately, as though afraid it might crumble in her trembling hands. She slid it across the bench toward the judge. It showed a little boy in a hospital bed, pale but smiling, a brave, fragile kind of smile. In his hands was a hand-drawn sign made of notebook paper colored in crayon. It read, "Mom, you're my hero." "That's Ethan," she said quietly. "He made that for me last month when I missed a meeting with the landlord to stay with him overnight." Judge Caprio picked up the photograph and studied it in silence. His eyes softened, the courtroom around him fading into a blur. "He looks like a strong boy," he said finally. "And very loved," Laura nodded. "He is. He keeps saying he wants to be a driver one day. So Mommy never has to walk again, he tells me." A murmur rippled through the courtroom. Soft sighs, muffled sniffles. The bailiff shifted uncomfortably, blinking hard. Even the prosecutor, once stoic, lowered her gaze. Caprio leaned forward, his voice gentle. "When was the last time you received a paycheck?" Laura hesitated, her voice barely a whisper. 3 months ago, before hospice took him in full time. I spend my days there now. Sometimes I volunteer just to be close to him. I read to other children when Ethan's asleep." The judge sat back, pressing his lips together. For a moment, the sound of the ceiling fan was the only thing that moved in that still air. "Miss Daniels," he said softly, "you did exactly what a good mother should do." She looked up, startled by the kindness in his tone. He went on, voice trembling slightly with memory. "When I was a boy, my mother worked nights cleaning houses to feed 6 of us. She was never home for dinner, but she never let us feel alone. That's what love looks like. And I see that same strength in you. Tears streamed down Laura's cheeks now. I just didn't want him to wake up without me there, she said. I promised him I'd never leave, not even for one night. Caprio nodded slowly, then glanced down at the stack of tickets on his desk. The paper rustled softly as he flipped through them, each one a symbol of nights she'd spent watching over her child instead of sleeping in her bed. He exhaled deeply, and when he looked up again, his eyes were glistening. If I find you, he said gently, I punish love. And I won't do that. A sharp gasp spread through the room. People turned, whispering, holding their breath. The clerk blinked. Unsure if she'd heard correctly, Caprio repeated himself, louder now, his voice steady. All tickets dismissed. Laura's hands flew to her mouth. She sobbed, unable to speak. Oh my God! Thank you. Thank you, Your Honor, she said between tears. But the judge wasn't finished. He reached slowly into his wallet, pulled out a crisp $50 bill, and placed it on the bench. Ms. Daniels, he said, buy Ethan something from me. Something that makes him smile. She shook her head, trembling. Oh, I can't, Your Honor, he interrupted with a small, fatherly smile. You can, and you will. What is he like? He loves toy cars, she whispered through tears. He says he wants to drive one day. Caprio smiled warmly. Then buy him a good one. Maybe something red. The clerk's eyes filled. The prosecutor bit her lip. The gallery, ordinary citizens who'd come to settle their own fines, began to clap softly, uncertainly at first, then louder, until the small courtroom filled with gentle applause. And there, in that moment, something sacred happened. The law met mercy. The story did not end in that courtroom. It only began there. Within hours, the video clip was uploaded online. Within days, millions had seen it. And within a week, Laura Daniels' story was being shared around the world, from Providence to Paris, from small-town living rooms to hospital waiting rooms. It wasn't about a parking ticket anymore. It was about grace, the kind that doesn't demand headlines, but earns hearts. Comment sections overflowed with emotion. I'm crying. That judge is a gift to humanity. That mother deserves the world. Justice with compassion. That's what we need everywhere. In the middle of the storm of kindness that followed, something unexpected happened. A local charity organization reached out to the courthouse. They had seen the video and wanted to help. We'd like to cover Ms. Daniels' outstanding bills, they said. Her rent, utilities, groceries, whatever she needs to get back on her feet. The courthouse staff contacted Laura. When she heard the news, she broke down again. I can't believe people still care, she said softly. It feels like someone finally saw me. Meanwhile, in a small hospital room with soft lighting and the faint hum of machines, Ethan watched the same video. He lay tucked under a blanket covered in cartoon cars. The nurse had set up a tablet beside his bed so he could see it. There he was. Judge Caprio's kind voice filling the screen, his warm smile unchanged even as he said, buy Ethan something from me. The little boy grinned, his eyes wide. Mom, that man sounds like Grandpa, he said, laughing weakly. Laura smiled through tears, stroking his hair. He kind of does, doesn't he? 2 weeks later, a small package arrived at Judge Caprio's chambers. Inside was a handwritten letter on notebook paper, folded carefully, and a photo. Ethan holding up a bright red toy car. The letter read, Dear Judge Caprio, I don't have the right words to thank you. You didn't just forgive my fines. You gave me hope when I thought the world had forgotten people like me. Ethan saw your video and said, Mom, that man has a heart like yours. He wanted me to tell you that he picked out a red car, his favorite color. Thank you for reminding us that kindness still exists. With love, Laura and Ethan Daniels Caprio placed the letter gently on his desk. He read it twice, then framed it beside a photograph of his own mother. Whenever someone visited his office and asked about it, he would smile and say, that letter's worth more than any award I've ever received. Time moved on, but the story refused to fade. Weeks passed. People kept writing to the courthouse, single parents, nurses, veterans, even teenagers. Some shared their own hardships. Others just wanted to say, thank you for showing that justice could still have a heart. The video became one of the most shared moments in the show's history. Millions of comments poured in from every corner of the world. I'm crying at 2 a.m. watching this. The world needs more Caprios. I showed this to my students to teach them empathy. Compassion should be contagious. At a community event months later, an elderly woman approached the judge with tears in her eyes. "I lost my son last year," she said. "But when I watched that video, I felt peace again. You didn't just help that mother. You helped all of us." Caprio placed a hand over his heart. "It's her strength that helped us," he said. "I only listened." That night, as the courthouse emptied and the city lights flickered on outside, Caprio sat alone at his bench for a moment. The photo of Ethan lay nearby. The letter's words echoed in his mind. "Thank you for reminding us that kindness still exists." He closed his eyes and whispered softly to himself, "That's all I ever wanted to do." Outside the courthouse, Laura's life began to rebuild. One step at a time. The charity's help gave her a few months of stability. She returned to part-time work at the hospital, not as a receptionist this time, but as a patient liaison, helping families who came in frightened and lost, just as she once had been. Her co-workers said she had a gift, the ability to make anyone feel seen. When asked why she cared so much, she would smile and say, "Because someone once cared for me when they didn't have to." Ethan's health wavered. Some good days, some bad, but he carried his little red toy car everywhere. He called it Judge Frank. Whenever he raced it across his bed, he'd say, "Judge Frank's helping the cars who got in trouble." It made the nurses laugh. But deep down, everyone understood the truth in that innocent line. Months later, when Caprio visited the hospital for a charity event, he met Ethan in person. The boy sat in his wheelchair, thin but bright-eyed, holding that same red car. "Hi, Your Honor," he said shyly. "I got the car you sent me." Caprio knelt beside him, smiling. "And do you like it?" Ethan nodded proudly. "I love it. I'm going to be a driver one day, and when I do, I'll never park in the wrong spot." The whole room laughed softly through tears. Caprio chuckled and said, "You've already learned the most important rule. My friend, drive with kindness." A few months later, Ethan's battle came to an end. The hospital held a small memorial service. Laura sat in the front row, clutching the same photo she'd once handed the judge. Judge Caprio attended quietly, sitting near the back. When it was his turn to speak, he said only this: "Ethan taught me something that no law book ever could, that compassion doesn't need authority, only a heart." He looked at Laura and added, "Your son reminded us all what love looks like." The narrator's tone softens as gentle piano music fades in. In a world obsessed with rules, deadlines, and penalties, one courtroom in Providence reminds us that empathy is still the purest form of justice. Judge Frank Caprio didn't just dismiss a fine that day. He restored something far greater: faith. Faith that even within the walls of the law, there's room for humanity. Outside the courthouse, Laura was seen leaving with tears on her cheeks and the faintest smile on her lips. Sunlight glinted through the trees as she held her son's photo close to her heart. For a brief moment, the world seemed to stand still, reminding us all that love can be stronger than any law. You never know the battle someone is fighting, the narrator reflects softly. Sometimes mercy is the law. What would you have done if you were the judge that day? Would you have followed the rules or your heart? Tell us in the comments below. Like this video if you believe kindness can change lives, and subscribe for more real stories that prove justice still has a heart. And remember, sometimes, the smallest act of compassion can echo louder than any verdict.